Okay, so yeah, thanks very much for the introduction. Yeah, my name's Kay Ritchie. I'm a senior lecturer in psychology at the University of Lincoln, and I'm going to talk to you about what I've been dedicating my research time to, which is all about photo ID and the science behind face recognition. So why are we doing this? I guess that's the first question to ask. Why are we interested in photo ID? And I guess the answer is reasonably obvious. This is something that affects our lives, or used to affect our lives more in the old world of pre-pandemic times. We're really used to having to prove our identity by using photo ID. So whether it's picking up a parcel at the post office or crossing borders, we're used to using a photo of ourselves on an official document to prove that we are who we say we are. But there's a problem with that. And the problem is that face recognition is actually really difficult when you don't know the person. So I'm going to show you an example here. The middle photo is a genuine UK driving license photo, reproduced here with permission, of course. And your job is to think to yourself, is that a photo of the person on the left or the person on the right? So whose driving license picture is that? Well, whether you said left or right, you're all correct. All of those three photos show the same person. And really, this is an illustration of the fact that the same person can look quite different in different photos. Now, that should not come as a surprise to you. You know that you don't look the same in your, say, Twitter profile picture as you do in your driving license picture. But this creates a real problem for the people whose job it is to check photo ID, because more often than not, they're going to be unfamiliar with the person in front of them. So if you think about your own passport photo, I mean, if it's anything like mine, I really look quite like a serial killer. I'm sure many of you are the same. And is that photo of you necessarily representative of the way you look when you're presenting yourself at a border? So say for a passport officer to check your photo ID. So the way we reproduce this sort of passport ID, photo ID checking task in the lab is to use what we call a face matching test. So there we just present two photos side by side on the screen, like you can see this left pair of the gents and the right pair of the ladies. So we would present this on the screen and just say, these are two photos, do they both show the same person or are they two different people? And there's actually a standard test, the Glasgow face matching test, which is a standardized test of this ability of face matching. So the pair on the left, you can do this yourself, is that same person or two different people? What about the photos on the right? Well, the ones on the left are two different people, and the ones on the right are the same person. And crucially, these photos have only been taken seconds apart with two different cameras, but you can see how someone's appearance can vary quite a bit, particularly with a monocular lens. You even get distortions in the sort of shape of the face. And typically, people are about 80% accurate at this task. You might think that sounds quite good. You know, if chance is 50%, so same or different, you've got two options, so chance would be 50%. 80% sounds quite good. But if you think of the case of, say, Heathrow Airport in pre-pandemic times, and the number of people who are going through Heathrow Airport on a daily basis, a 20% error rate is actually pretty big and pretty problematic. So a lot of our research and the research of our colleagues around the world in this area has been focused on looking at how we could possibly improve this process. So could we either improve the photo ID or could we improve the people who are checking the photo ID? So first of all, what we've tried to do is understand why this task is difficult. Why aren't people 100% accurate at telling whether two photos taken seconds apart show the same person or not? And what we really appeal to here is the idea of variability being problematic. So the same person can look really different in different photos. And the reason that we kind of don't see that as a problem is the problem of familiarity. So we're so good at recognizing familiar people. We really rarely fail to recognize someone that we do know. So if you're familiar with what Tom Cruise looks like, you've got no problem saying, yeah, all those photos on the top there show Tom Cruise. You'd probably struggle to say what exactly it is, to sort of articulate what it is in the pictures that you're seeing that makes you so sure that they're the same person. But it's just a qualitatively different process looking at a familiar person compared to looking at an unfamiliar person. You just say, yeah, I know Tom Cruise, those photos are all Tom Cruise. If you're unfamiliar with the chap at the bottom, it's a little bit more difficult to see that those are all photos of the same person. And in fact, you can see that he varies quite a lot in different photos of him. Things like his head angle, but also, you know, distance from camera is producing a difference in like sort of face shape, his hair is different, facial hair, that sort of thing. So because we're so good with familiar faces, we think, well, everyone must just be quite good at face recognition because I'm really good at recognizing the people who I know. And that produces then this over-reliance on photo ID and the problem of unfamiliar face recognition. Excuse me. So we've been looking at ways to improve this unfamiliar face recognition process. And you might be thinking, well, does it really need improving though? All of your, you know, the studies that I've shown you or the stats that I've given you there, it's all based on a computer task. And of course, Passport and any sort of photo ID task is usually a live task, right? You're standing there in front of the person and you're producing your photo ID. Well, we do love in psychology everywhere to mercilessly exploit the goodwill of our students. So we actually used our students a couple of years ago to do a live face matching test. So we sent them out into the world with a photo of them or a photo of someone who looked a bit like them. And they just approached people and asked them, is this me? So we want to find out, are people any better at this in the real world than they are when we present photos on a computer screen? And the answer actually is just no. So this is a graph just showing you the different results across different tests. So down the side, we've got people's percent correct. So remember, 50% chance, you're saying, is this me, yes or no? Is this same or different? 50% chance. So the standard test, the Glasgow face matching test that I showed you before, I said accuracy is about 80%. In our lab, we find that accuracy is around 80%. And in the live task where our students said, is this me? Accuracy is around 80%. So it doesn't get any more easy if you're actually able to see a live person in front of you compared to just looking at two photographs on a screen. So what we do know when we've been considering ways to improve the actual physical photo ID, we can appeal to what we already know in other areas of face processing. So we have looked to the area of face learning. Now, from some of our own studies and studies from other people in different labs, we've shown that it's really important when you're trying to learn someone that you learn all the different ways their face can look. So what we do is studies where we expose you to variability within a person. So these top images, all these images show the same person. And the top images are giving you some natural variability in terms of lighting, pose, camera characteristics, etc. And the bottom images are all taken just at the exact same time. So here he's now not able to change the lighting, it's the same camera, he can't change his hairstyle or have a shave because they're all taken seconds apart, but he can still change a little bit in terms of like head angle and facial expression. And what we find is that if we ask people to learn what new people look like, they do much better when they are learning the person from the highly variable images, so the images like the ones on top, compared to images that show low variability. So that explains, you know, how a face goes from unfamiliar to familiar. When we don't know someone, we don't know the different ways their face can look. As we get to know them, we see their face change, we see more of their variability, and then we become familiar with them. So variability is a problem for unfamiliar face perception because we don't know the different ways that person's face can look, but variability helps us, and it's really important that we're exposed to quite a bit of variability in order to learn what a new person looks like well. So when we're thinking about improving photo ID, we and other colleagues elsewhere in the world have appealed to this idea of exposure to variability. And what we've done is we've tried to say, well, what if you had a passport or photo ID card that instead of containing one image of the person, had maybe 4 images of them so that you could quickly sort of expose people to variability. So we've developed tasks that look a bit like this. So at the top, you've got just the usual one-to-one face matching task, which is sort of, you know, one photo ID, one image on the photo ID and one person standing in front of you. And then we've, in another condition in the experiments, you'll see 4 images of the person. You're told these 4 photos show the same person. Is this him too? And so that's to simulate if we had sort of 4 images on a passport instead of just one picture. And what we find is, so in the, again, down the side here, we've got people's percent correct. And in the task, it's split up into 2 different types of trials, so 2 different sort of types of images. The match trials are where the photos do show the same person, and the mismatch trials are the photos where it shows 2 different people. So you'd have 4 photos of one person and either the same person match, or 4 photos of the same person and then a different person, that's mismatch. And what we find is that providing people with 4 images, so the pink bars here, increase people's performance on match trials, so when it does show the same person, but actually decreases people's performance on mismatch trials, so when it doesn't show the same person. So basically what we say that is, it's a shift in bias. It's just lowering people's criterion to respond yes. So you see all these pictures and you say, gosh, you can look like that, that, and that, fine, then that must be him too. So when the answer's the same and you're saying same, you get that right. But when the answer is different, you're still saying the same. So you get that wrong, okay? So it looks like, although exposure to variability helps with face learning, we can't use the lessons we've learned there to apply that to improving photo ID, because exposure to variability here is just making people say yes a lot more. And that's not what we want in terms of passport control or anything where your identity is being verified. We don't want everyone to just think, yes, that's you all the time. So we've tried a few other things for improving photo ID, which I'm happy to talk about more in the chat. But the other option, of course, is if we can't improve photo ID, maybe we can improve the photo ID checkers, right? So we can recruit lots of people to be the border officers and then train them to get really good at this sort of task. So a really recent paper from some of our colleagues at the University of New South Wales has compared lots of different, well, they've compared more than 2, but in this paper they look at 2 different professional facial image comparison training courses. So the graph along the bottom is split into 3 parts. So again, we've got accuracy down the side. We've got the part labeled GFMT, that's the Glasgow Face Matching Test, and then we've got 2 other tests. And then what you've got is course A, course B, and controls who don't take part in any image comparison training. So the people do some image comparison training, and then, or they don't if they're in the control group, and then they take part in these 3 different tests. And basically what you can see is there's kind of no differences there. You might see tiny little bits of improvement in some places, but that's met with tiny little bits of courses actually making people worse in other places. So pre and post training, their ability stays the same. So the training courses are not improving their ability at this task. So we can't just recruit people and train them up. That doesn't seem to work. Something else that's a little bit scary, so another paper led by one of my colleagues at the University of New South Wales looked at actual passport officers, people who do these tasks, and looked at how error prone they are in face matching. And they found that they're no better than our undergraduate students as a whole. So that's a bit horrifying. I'm not sure I would want many of our undergraduate students doing a face matching job for several hours at a time, but that's because I think that they wouldn't be trained at it. But it turns out that even the people who are trained at it are no better than our students. The other really interesting thing that they found was there's no correlation between people's employment duration and their accuracy on the face matching test. So down the side, we've got, this is the same Glasgow face matching test again, we've got their accuracy on the face matching test, and along the bottom, we've got their employment duration in years. So each dot represents a passport controller who they tested. And so you can see, if you look to the left-hand side of the graph, you've got people who've not been in the job very long at all, but some of them are over 90% accurate. So someone there's doing really quite well at the task. But if you look to the right-hand side of the graph, you've got people who've been in the job for over 20 years, some of whom are only just above chance. So there's no relationship between how long you've been doing it for and how good you are at it, or at an approximation of the task. But the thing that is really interesting is that some people are just good, right? There are some people who, irrespective of how long they've been doing this for, they're really quite good at these face matching tests. So the message here is, we can improve face matching, the sort of face matching ability of an organization, not by improving or changing the photo ID, and not by training people, because we've seen that that doesn't work, but we can simply select people who are naturally good at this. So face matching ability exists on a spectrum. And if we just pick people at the higher end, so while you're interviewing for your new passport officers, if you give them a face matching test as part of the aptitude testing, then that will allow you to, instead of thinking you can recruit anyone and train them to get good, you can just select the people who are already naturally good at this test. And that, in fact, is what they are now doing in Australia based on this research. So we can't really improve photo ID. We've tried a few different things. That doesn't work. I showed you that exposure to variability doesn't work with face matching in the same way as we know it does with face learning. We can't just recruit anyone and train them to be good at this task because the training courses don't work. But what we can do is select people who are already naturally good at this task and give the job to them, so that we're sure that as an organization, our face matching is quite good because we've picked people who have that ability and they're already good at the task. So that's it. Happy to answer lots of questions. Thank you to everyone at Lincoln, UNSW and other places, and funding, of course, for the research. So thanks very much for listening.
Thank you, Kay. That was great. Yes, we've had quite a few questions in the chat, which I'll let Evie take a moment to read through. I mean, there's also a slight level of alarm at the porousness of our borders, I think, is the sort of general reaction to this. But yeah, Evie, do you have some questions for Kay?
Oh, yes. I mean, the most important one is, do you have any tips on how to look good in your Instagram photos?
I think filters. Surely the answer's got to be filters.
Yeah, someone pointed out that the passport office camera setting seems to be on serial killer setting, which I thought was spot on. When border control look at your passport photo and then at you, and then back at your passport photo, what are they looking for?
That's a great question. We don't know the inner workings of the training that they're given, not in the UK anyway. So we're not sure exactly what they're told to do, but we do know generally that in image comparison training courses or in face recognition training courses, people are told just to inspect different features of the face or look for distinguishing marks like freckles or moles, that sort of thing that's unlikely to change.
So next question is, we previously had a presentation about face blindness. So would this variability process help the people who have this condition? Or is that just a neurological dysfunction that we can't override?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, you know, I mentioned face recognition ability kind of lies on a spectrum. So what you want to be doing is picking the people who are at the top end of that spectrum for your ID checking jobs. People with face blindness or prosopagnosia lie at the other end of that spectrum, and it's usually, it can be congenital, so people are born with it, or it can be acquired through brain injury. And what we see is usually that ability just doesn't improve as time goes on. And since we've not found anything that's any particular training course or technique that's helping sort of neurologically intact people improve in their face recognition, we're also not able to find anything that's sort of a foolproof training course to help people with prosopagnosia, although that is a task I set my students. So if they ever, in one of my lectures, so if they ever do come up with something properly testable, I've warned them I will steal it, try it, and take all the credit if it works. So I can let you know if we do find anything that works like that.
There is quite a few questions about race and questions about people not being able to recognize people of different race as well as or their own race, and how does that play into? So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's great. So yes, whoever said that is absolutely right. It's a really sort of well-studied, well-known effect in psychology called the other race effect. And what we find is that it exists for every race of people looking at every other race of faces. So you are just going to be better at recognizing the faces of the people who are the same race as you compared to people who are a different race than you. There are a few different things that might change that. So some people in previous studies have suggested that contact with another race, so if you live in a city that's not like Lincoln, Lincoln is very white, but if you live in a more multi-ethnic city, that you might have more contact with people of other races, and you might sort of get better at recognizing people of other races, but that's not always been replicated. There's also just the sort of perceptual expertise hypothesis that the more you see people of a different race, the more you can sort of see little differences that are going to be able to individuate them. I think it is a really important question when we think about photo ID and who's checking the photo ID. So should we be strategically employing mixed teams of lots of different races? So for instance, at the passport issuing office, where people are applying for a new passport and that's being compared to their previous image, should that be filtered to people who have more or less experience with different races? That's an interesting question. But I don't know of anywhere that's doing that. I don't know of anywhere that's taking that sort of super seriously in terms of the way they organize the people in their organization to look at faces.
A lot of questions also about replacing the poor passport control officers with artificial intelligence, cameras, and algorithms. So are we at a stage where algorithms and AI are better at this task? So the automatic gates, for instance, are they better, worse than humans? And how, if they're not better, how long until we get there?
Yeah, great question. So we know quite a bit about machine learning and how sort of artificial intelligence has helped us along the way. So deep convolutional neural networks are the new step change in how we train face recognition algorithms. And essentially what we've seen in the past 10 years is a massive increase in their performance. So they've just gotten better and better and better as we've started introducing machine learning, deep convolutional neural networks. So on a sort of perfect task where you've got really high quality images that are posed the same, that are lit really well, a computer will outperform a human. The computer can be up to 100% accurate in the different algorithms that are used. So there's a testing program, the National Institute of Standards and Technology in the USA carries out the face recognition vendor tests, FRVT. You can find the details of all of them online. And what they do is it's a sort of standard test of all the algorithms. So people who build the algorithms submit their algorithms to this test. And some of the algorithms on really sort of high quality image trials are 100% accurate. What we do know is that on more difficult trials where there's occluded parts of the face or it's lower quality images, humans can still outperform the machines. But I think what's key to remember, so at the e-gates, for example, what's happening is that's, the algorithm in the e-gate is comparing your passport image, the digital image in your passport, to your face that you present at the border. If there's a problem with that, which in my experience there invariably is, it can't find the face or something goes wrong or I've forgotten to take my glasses off, what it does is it refers the decision to a human. So if you walk past the e-gates and turn around, you'll see someone who's basically doing 6 face matching tasks at the same time, looking at all the ones that have gone wrong in the e-gates. And so the machine is deferring the decision making to the human. And what we will always see, particularly if we think of things like policing, where perhaps there's an image from CCTV and the police are feeding that into a database that has lots of previous arrest images, or in the US, everyone's state driving license photo, and it's looking for matches. The ultimate decision is always left to the human. So the human's always going to be a really important part of that system as a whole, where the algorithm might select the most likely matches from its database in that sort of police instance, but ultimately the human will always be the one making the decision in that case. So what we need to do is really understand the algorithms that we're using. So users of this technology need to know what are the types of images. Will this particular algorithm only work with really high quality front facing images, or is it a bit better with faces that are turned and things as well? So in order for it to work properly, we need to first of all really understand what the algorithm is doing, but secondly not lose sight of the fact that it's giving you probability scores, and really people are the ones who are ultimately making the decision. I think given the step change that we've seen in recent years in the performance of algorithms, they're going to continue to improve. People are now testing algorithms. They're building them specifically to be able to deal with face masks, since this is a new problem in the Western world. And we've been doing some work on that, and we're actually doing some work with the National Institute of Standards and Technology in the USA to provide them with images of people with wearing face masks. And also there is the issue of, you asked about race before, Evie, and there is the issue of biometrics having sort of implicit demographic biases, and the face recognition vendor test has also looked at demographic changes. So some algorithms are really great at recognizing people of different races, and some aren't. If they've only been trained on white faces, that's what they're going to be really good at recognizing. So we have to be aware of what our algorithms are trained on and what type of images they're really good at identifying in order to make sure we get the most out of the algorithms.
Right, so the biases that we have and we build the algorithms, we kind of put the biases into the algorithms. Since you mentioned the issue about policing and crime, question is, why are we still relying on photo ID as means of identifying criminals? And is it possible that we are sentencing 20% innocent people because we're wrong? Because the way we recognize faces, as you just showed us, is just not that good as good as we thought.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, well, what we do know is that at least in the US, the UK and Australia, sort of photo ID evidence can't be used, and algorithms identification of people can't be used in court on its own. And certainly what we know from eyewitness memory and things is that it's not very good. And so increasingly, people will be relying on other evidence in order to secure a conviction. We know from places like the Innocence Project in the USA that looks at wrongful convictions. And now they know they're wrong convictions because they're people who've been convicted of a crime, and then subsequently DNA evidence has shown that they're not the person who'd committed the crime. The overwhelming reason for in sort of number in the, I'll start that sentence again. Overwhelmingly, the reason that they've been convicted in the first place is because of eyewitness ID. And that's overturned then with DNA evidence. So we know that we get unsafe convictions when we rely only on face. And I think that's quite well known now in the criminal justice system. So I'm hoping that we're not convicting 20% of the wrong people because we're using other evidence as well. There was another part of that question though, wasn't there, Evie, at the start? What was the first thing you said there?
What did I say? Are we still relying on IDs for
right. Why are we still relying on photo ID? I mean, I agree. I'm glad we are. It keeps giving me interesting things to research in my job. It keeps all us face researchers in a job that we love at photo ID. But I would be quite happy to rely on something like iris scanning. We think that's a bit more accurate than photo ID. But ultimately, people don't like putting their head in a hole and having something scan their eye. They're quite happy having a photo taken of their face and showing that to the nice passport controller.
That is very strange, actually. Why would you be happy with taking your entire face rather than just an eye? But maybe that's for another talk. What role does the actual face of the stranger play in this? So are there people who have very bland faces that you see everywhere? And are there people with very unique faces? And how does that play into the stats?
Yeah, that's a good question. And for sure we see effects of like distinctiveness. If people have very distinctive faces, and they're presented as a match trial in one of our face matching tests, so 2 different photos of them, basically everyone will get that right. And that's some sort of a function of them being a bit more distinctive. But we're talking a little more distinctive. You know, we haven't done any research on people with, for example, visible differences on their face. So that's something that would be really interesting to have a look at. I guess actually I'm reminded of a question that a student asked me after my lecture today, which was about face tattoos. He said, well, what about face tattoos? And people have done research on this, and it seems to be that if you have a face tattoo, what the person remembers about you is the face tattoo. So if you've then removed it, if it was a temporary tattoo, or if you've covered it up with makeup, the person may not recognize you again because they're only remembering the tattoo. And so in some places in the world, the police will use replication techniques where they'll replicate that face tattoo across all of the lineup members before they show you the lineup. Or they'll use deletion, where they will just Photoshop out the face tattoo and then ask the eyewitness to try and pick the person out of the lineup. So yeah, there's definitely something there with facial distinctiveness.
Right.
Whether some of us just have bland faces and we just tend to look like lots of other people, I don't know. So I don't know about the flip side of that.
Right. So my master plan of applying a temporary tattoo on my face before committing crime isn't such a master plan after all. A question that many people asked is, would it then be better to have a series of photos or photos doing silly faces and, you know, a photo booth type of stripe in your passport rather than the expressionless, don't smile, tuck your hair behind your ears and look straight into the camera photos?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we've shown from our research using multiple images in this task is that no, that won't help people get the task right. What it will do is it will just increase the likelihood that they'll say it's a match. So if we had lots of different photos in our passports, or yeah, like a photo booth strip of images in our passports, that would give the passport controller some idea of how our face varies. But what our research has shown is that that's just more likely to make them say, fine, you can vary and look like this, 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 and this, then fine, that's you as well. Come into our country. Right.
And the last question. So what happened to the police officers who did get less than 50% accuracy on that test? Did they change careers? Were they sacked? It's a burning question.
Yeah, so this was the passport officers. So no one dropped below 50%, right? So people were above chance, but some of them were only a bit above chance. And this is the problem that we have when we do this type of research. The employer will always want to know who those people are and to try and help them or to maybe not try and help them. And that's information that we will not give away. So I'm saying we, I mean my colleagues in Australia who led this research, but they will not take identifying information from the passport controllers, and they certainly won't be passing that on to their employer. They found it in 1997, another group of people in the same lab in Australia did a study with cashiers. So Australia at that time was thinking about bringing in photographs on credit cards. So they did a study on actual cashiers whose job it would be, it's like the challenge 25, you know, do I think this is you when you're buying an age restricted item? And they almost didn't go ahead with the research because the supermarket was so insistent that they were going to want to know who was doing well and who was doing badly at this task, and that's just not something that we as researchers will ever give away. So nobody knows what happened to those people. They won't even have known. In many cases in these types of studies, they won't know if they're the person who's done terribly badly or if they're someone who's done quite well.
Right, so they don't even know that they need to change careers. Great. Great for the border control. Well, thank you so much. Louise, over to you.
Thank you, Kay. That was absolutely marvellous.